Well, hello again, everyone. Um, Coming back with Luke, lesson 38 today, entitled Jesus Calls Matthew as his disciple. Apologize for the delay. It's been several weeks. Lisa's been pretty sick, had pneumonia, and so we're trying to get back in the saddle now. So we're going to be in Luke chapter 5, verses 27 to 32. And this story is also in Matthew 9 and in Mark 2, if you wanted to look at parallel passages. But beginning in verse 27 in Luke 5, after these things, he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax office, and he said to him, "Follow me." So Levi left all, rose up, and followed him. Then Levi gave him a great feast in his own house, and there were a great number of tax collectors and others who sat down with him. But the scribes and the Pharisees complained or grumbled against the disciples, saying, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" And apparently Jesus overheard this because he answered them and said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick." Hang on a sec. Just had a pop-up on my screen. Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Well, that's our passage for today. And I want to read you one other verse that has an interesting connection to this story today. And that's in Luke chapter 19, verse 2, which we'll be studying a long ways down the road from now, I'm sure. Luke 19:2 says, "And now behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus who was a chief tax collector, and he was rich." We'll see how this fits in here in a little bit. So in this passage, we see Matthew being referred to as a tax collector, literally a publican. They were referred to as farmers of taxes, customs officers, toll collectors, tax gatherers. These guys were hated by the people. They were classified as sinners along with harlots. The Jews often referred to them as Gentiles, which is a terrible slur coming from a Jew. Levi or Matthew was a Jew, and so it was even worse. And they just weren't very well liked. And basically, it's like calling a police officer a pig, to call him a Gentile. Now, it's interesting. Levi, this appears to be his true name. And I'm guessing Jesus must have renamed him Matthew, kind of like he renamed Simon to Peter, or John and James he referred to as the sons of thunder, or he changed Saul's name to Paul. Levi means that he was a Levite by birth. He should have been a minister or doing ministerial duties, not a tax collector. And his parents obviously had to be from the Levitical line, must have been crushed by the choice of his profession. Now, both in Luke and in Mark, they identify him as Levi, apparently his original given name at birth. Matthew, though, in his gospel, calls himself Matthew. So I'm guessing he liked his new name better. Matthew means gift of God. So Jesus called him the gift of God. He was a Jew living like a Gentile, collecting taxes from Rome, kind of like a bagman for the mafia. he was robbing the poor for the gain of the rich. And obviously, he was one of the rich, getting rich off the backs of the poor Jewish people. And I thought as I read this sounds so much like what we see today. The rich get richer off the backs of the poor. Nothing changes. Now, as a tax collector, he would have been required to take shorthand to keep records, which is interesting. It probably explains how he managed to record the entire Sermon on the Mount, where the others gave partial accounts. And just a thought I had as I read this, I was wondering why Jesus didn't have Matthew handle the treasury instead of Judas. Because Matthew was an expert at handling and processing money. Judas was a thief. But perhaps it's because Jesus or Judas had a role to play in history. Now, as we go on at the tax office, Matthew had his own little office right there at the entrance and exit point of the town of Capernaum, which is on the northernmost point of the Sea of Galilee. Anyone coming in or out of the city would be taxed there. It would be like going across the San Francisco Bay Bridge, and you have to go through the toll booth in order to use the bridge. So he would be a collector of taxes. In other words, he taxed the people, he took his cut, and he passed on the rest to the chief tax collector, who I just read to you in chapter 19 is a guy by the name of Zacchaeus. And then Zacchaeus would take his cut and forward on the rest of it to the Roman authorities. So Rome would assess a tax, and then the collectors could add on to it whatever they wanted. They basically were paying themselves by charging additional taxes. So they would just pass it on. This, as I read this, it seemed to be more and more like the way the mafia operated. Matthew was nothing more than a bagman for Rome. And notice he had his own home and could afford to throw a massive feast for Jesus and all of the disciples and all of Matthew's friends, tax collectors and such. And as you read this passage, you notice who some of the other guests were. My power's cutting off. But now, why would they be invited? Right? Other than maybe that old expression, birds of a feather flock together. Might the Jewish leaders have also been on the take? That somehow they were getting money from Matthew and Zacchaeus and these tax collectors. It just seems odd that Matthew would have invited them unless they were friends. But think of how odd this would be, a group of priests being invited to a mafia dinner. And then I thought, oh yeah, remember in the Vatican? Lisa, can you hear me? Hey, Lisa, are you there? No. Yeah. Hello?
Hi, what happened?
The